I've always believed that the hardest thing about life is not the hardships we face, but the silence we keep in the face of them. My name is Elellanar Bennett, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small house on a quiet street in Savannah, Georgia, a town known for its charm, its oak-lined avenues, and the warm, welcoming people who call it home. On the surface, my life might seem like that of any other grandmother, quiet, peaceful, full of little joys. I sell medicinal herbs at the Forsyth Farmers Market, offer advice on teas and remedies, and enjoy simple pleasures like sitting in my garden with a cup of chamomile tea and a good book. But beneath the peaceful exterior, there's a story I've carried for years, one that has shaped the woman I've become. It's a story I've kept to myself for far too long, because who wants to share a story like mine? It's one of pain, betrayal, and unimaginable betrayal. But it's also a story of survival. A story of strength, resilience, and ultimately the choice to break free. The truth is, I wasn't always the woman you see today. My life was once shattered by something no mother should ever have to endure. The betrayal of the one person she loved most in this world. Her own son. The man I raised, the boy I nurtured with all my heart. The one I thought I was giving a better future to, turned into someone I couldn't recognize. For over a decade I lived in a nightmare. One that I never imagined possible. One that left me paralyzed, both physically and emotionally, unable to protect myself from the very person I had trusted to love and care for me. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like the plot of a horror movie, a story too cruel to be real. But I assure you it's all true. It happened right here in Savannah, in the home where I raised my son Junior, the same house that had once been full of laughter and love. A home where I gave everything I had to make sure Junior grew up to be a good man, only to be betrayed by him in the worst possible way. You may be wondering why I'm sharing this now. The truth is, after years of carrying this burden, I realized that silence only allowed the pain to fester. I stayed quiet for so long because I feared judgment, because I didn't want to believe that my own son, my flesh and blood, could do something so horrific. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when I know there are others out there, women just like me, who are suffering in silence, who are afraid to speak up because they don't think anyone will believe them. This is for you, the ones who have suffered in silence, who are too afraid to ask for help, who think they're alone. I am here to tell you that you are not alone. And I'm sharing my story because I believe that if I can find the courage to speak, then maybe, just maybe, you can too. Before I begin, let me share a little about myself. I've lived a full life. I've had my fair share of joy and pain, love and loss. I grew up in Savannah, raised by a mother who taught me the value of hard work and self-reliance. My father was never around, he left when I was young, and it was my mother who raised me to be strong, independent, and to never depend on anyone for anything. She taught me that women are meant to be fighters, that we carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, and we do it with grace. When I was 19, I found out I was pregnant with Junior. The father of the child? Well, he disappeared the moment he knew I was expecting. He wasn't ready to be a father, he said. And so I was left alone to raise my son. But I didn't mind. I had my mother's teachings to guide me. I was determined to raise Junior well, to give him a life I never had. I worked at the textile factory, waking up at 5 a.m., and working long hours sewing clothes, all while making sure Junior had everything he needed. I did everything for him. I worked tirelessly to give him a good life, to show him the love I never felt as a child. I thought I was doing everything right. But I didn't see the warning signs. I didn't see the changes in him, the shifts in his behavior that would turn my world upside down. You see, this isn't just a story about abuse. It's a story about love, misplaced love, and the terrible cost of overprotectiveness. I loved Junior so much I gave him everything I could. I thought I was protecting him, but in the process I unknowingly enabled him, and perhaps, just perhaps, I created the monster I eventually had to face. The next part of my story will be difficult for some to hear. It's not easy to talk about what happened between me and my son, but I'm telling it because I know the truth can set people free. It can give them the strength to walk away from their abusers, to find a way out of their darkness. So, if you're still with me, if you're still listening, I thank you. And I ask you to bear with me as I share the truth of my life. Because it's time for me to let go of the shame I've carried for so long. And I hope that by telling you my story, you can learn from my pain and find your own path to healing. Stay with me because the hardest parts are yet to come. I often look back at the years I spent raising Junior, and sometimes I still can't believe how quickly it all went by. From the moment I found out I was pregnant at 19, I knew my life was going to change forever. I was young, yes, but I had the strength of my mother in me, and that was enough. She had always said that life doesn't hand you what you want, but it gives you what you need to grow. And looking back, maybe that's exactly what happened. Junior's father wasn't around. He disappeared as soon as he knew I was carrying his child. He didn't want the responsibility, didn't want to be a father. He was young, he said, and not ready to settle down. So it was just me, and that was fine by me. I was determined to raise my son on my own. I would make sure that he had everything I never had growing up. A home filled with love, a future full of opportunity, and a childhood that was better than mine ever was. I spent most of my days working in the textile factory here in Savannah, sewing clothes for the very people who could afford the things I could never buy. I would leave home before the sun came up, still half dreaming, and catch 2 buses to get to work. The factory was a noisy place. A large building full of women hunched over sewing machines, stitching fabrics that were sold in stores far beyond what we could ever afford. I remember the smell of the place. Fabric, dust, and chemicals that lingered in my nose for hours after I left. But I didn't mind the hard work. I didn't mind the long hours, because every penny I earned went into making sure Junior had what he needed. I worked all day and still came home to make dinner, clean the house, and do everything I could to make his world better. My back would ache from the machines, my hands stiff from the constant motion, but my love for Junior made it all worth it. I believed that if I worked hard enough, he would have the life I never had. I wanted him to be more than I ever could be. And I thought that the more I gave, the better it would be for him. Weekends were our special time. When I wasn't washing clothes or cooking, I would take Junior to the park. I'd buy him ice cream, something I couldn't afford for myself but always managed to squeeze out for him. I wanted him to have a childhood full of the joy and freedom I never had. And as much as I worked, I never stopped telling him how much I loved him. I used to tell him that no matter what, he could always count on me. I didn't have much, but what I had was his. My son was the center of my world, and I thought that would be enough to keep him safe. Junior was always so affectionate, so loving. He would come home from school and give me hugs that would make me feel like the richest woman in the world. When I was sick, he would sit by my side, his little hand in mine, telling me everything would be okay. He was my world and I was his. When he said he would take care of me when he grew up, I believed him with all my heart. That was the promise he made, and I believed in him. I thought the love I gave him would shape him into a man of integrity, someone who would care for others just as I had cared for him. But in the midst of all the care and sacrifice, I didn't notice the subtle changes. It was easy to overlook, to chalk up his growing need for attention to the pressures of adolescence. He was my son, my baby, and I never imagined that the boy I had raised with so much love could ever be anything other than the sweet child I had seen him grow into. The first signs of trouble came quietly, creeping into our home like a slow storm. It wasn't loud, but it was there, lurking. It started with little things. A lingering look when I was changing clothes, a hug that seemed just a little too long. When I asked him about it, he would laugh it off, say it was just affection, that it was nothing more. I would tell myself that I was just overthinking things, that I was tired, that my work was wearing me thin. But the truth is, I didn't know what to think. I never wanted to believe that the boy I loved with all my heart, the boy I had given everything for, could be capable of such things. As the months passed, Junior's behavior began to change in ways that were harder to ignore. He became more touchy, more insistent on being close to me. At first, I thought it was a phase, something that came with growing up. But soon, I realized that the line between affection and something darker was being blurred. The hugs became longer, the touches more frequent, the excuses for his actions more ridiculous. I started to feel uncomfortable, to feel like I was losing control over the boundaries I had once set so carefully. First, I ignored it. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just going through a phase. But when it happened again, when he touched me in a way that made my skin crawl, I couldn't pretend anymore. I started to question everything I knew about love, about trust, about my own son. What was I supposed to do? How could I confront him? How could I tell him that something he was doing, something that he thought was normal, was wrong? How could I possibly tell the boy I had raised that he was hurting me? But I didn't know how to stop him. I was his mother, and in my heart, I couldn't accept that my own son could betray me in such a way. The guilt started to eat me up, and I became more and more confused. Was I imagining things? Was I being too sensitive? How could I explain what was happening when I didn't even understand it myself? I tried to talk to him, tried to set boundaries, but he always had a ready excuse. He said I was exaggerating, that I was being too paranoid, that I was just tired from work. He made me feel like I was crazy, like I was overreacting. I felt trapped in my own home, unable to escape from the son I had devoted my life to. But then, as the months turned into years, the changes became harder to deny. The affection I thought was normal turned into something much darker. Junior became possessive, demanding more of my attention and affection, and each time I tried to draw a line, he would push a little further. His actions became more insistent, more manipulative, and I found myself sinking into a pit of despair. How could I protect myself from him? How could I protect the son I had once believed in? Looking back now, I realized that this was the beginning of the nightmare. It was then that I began to understand that the love I had given him wasn't the same love he was offering me in return. The boy I had raised was not the person I thought he was. And that realization, the painful truth of it, would change everything. At first, the changes in Junior were so small, so subtle, that I convinced myself it was all in my head. I had spent so many years giving him all my love, all my attention, that I refused to believe that anything could be wrong. The first signs weren't loud or dramatic. They were like tiny ripples in a calm pond, easy to overlook if you weren't paying close enough attention. But looking back, I realized that those tiny ripples were the first signals of something much darker brewing beneath the surface. It started with the way he looked at me. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just the gaze of a young man coming into his own, figuring out who he was. But soon, I began to notice something different. There was an intensity to his looks that wasn't just casual admiration. It was a gaze that lingered, a look that seemed to see more of me than a son should ever see of his mother. I would catch him staring when I was changing clothes or when I came out of the shower. First, I thought I was just being paranoid. After all, he was my son, there was no way he could have any thoughts like that, right? I would shrug it off, but the unease started to settle in. His eyes would follow me across the room in a way that made me feel uncomfortable, but I convinced myself that it was just a phase, a teenage boy's curiosity perhaps. But the way he held that gaze, so uncomfortably steady, was hard to ignore. I told myself it was just me getting older, becoming overly sensitive. After all, I was used to being strong, to not letting things bother me. But deep down, I began to feel something wasn't quite right. Junior had always been affectionate, and as he grew older, that affection seemed to intensify. The hugs that used to be warm and innocent became longer, almost suffocating at times. He would come up behind me while I was cooking in the kitchen, wrap his arms around me and press his body against mine. He said it was just to show affection, that he loved me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The comfort I once found in his embrace started to feel more like a heavy weight, something I wasn't sure I wanted or needed. One evening when I was sitting in the living room reading a book, Junior came in and sat beside me. He leaned in too close, too long, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. His breath was warm on my neck, and I couldn't move away. I had always told myself that Junior loved me, that he respected me, but now I was questioning if that was true. Was this normal for a mother and son? I kept telling myself that maybe I was overthinking things, that I was just tired from work, from the long hours at the factory. But deep down, I felt a discomfort I couldn't explain. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just being too sensitive, I thought. But as the months went by, the signs became harder to ignore. Junior would come into my room without knocking, always with an excuse. He would say he needed to ask me about something, or that he was looking for a book, or even that he just wanted to talk. But his eyes, those eyes, never left me. They followed me wherever I went, always searching, always studying. It was like I was a specimen to be examined, not a mother to be respected. There was one particular evening I'll never forget. Junior had come home late, and I was already in bed trying to fall asleep after a long day. He knocked on my door, and before I could even answer, he came in, saying he'd had a nightmare and couldn't sleep alone. He asked if he could sleep in my bed for just one night. I didn't think much of it, honestly. He was my son, and he had always been affectionate. So I let him lie down next to me, thinking it was just a momentary need for comfort. But as the night went on, things started to feel wrong. I woke up in the middle of the night, startled, to find him pressing his body against mine. His arm was draped over my waist, and I could feel his breath on my neck. I froze, not knowing what to do. When I asked him what he was doing, he quickly pulled away, pretending to be asleep, as if nothing had happened. The next morning when I brought it up, he denied it. He said I was dreaming, that nothing had happened, and that I was just tired from all the work. He convinced me that I was imagining things, that I had misunderstood the situation. But I didn't feel right. I started to lock my bedroom door at night, something I'd never done before. I had always trusted Junior, always felt safe with him in my home. But now I was locking myself in, hoping that the door would protect me from whatever it was that was starting to scare me. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore the growing fear in the pit of my stomach. The feeling that something was terribly wrong kept getting stronger. Junior's behavior began to take more subtle forms. He would touch me in ways that made my skin crawl, always under the guise of helping me. He said he was massaging my back to relieve tension, that he was helping me with my neck pain, but the touches were lingering, too intentional. I couldn't push him away, couldn't say anything, because I didn't know how to explain what was happening. How could I accuse my own son of something like this? How could I say out loud what I was starting to realize? He would try to convince me that I was just overreacting, that I needed to relax and stop being paranoid. But the truth was, I didn't feel safe in my own home. It was a confusing, terrifying realization. Here I was, the woman who had raised him with so much love, and now I was afraid of him. I couldn't understand it. How could this be happening? How could my son, the boy I had given everything for, turn into someone I was scared of? It took me a long time to understand what was going on, to see the situation for what it truly was. I had been so blinded by my love for him that I couldn't see the signs until they became undeniable. And when they did, it was too late. The subtle shifts had turned into something much more sinister, something that I wasn't prepared to face. It was hard to admit to myself, even harder to admit to anyone else, that my son was hurting me. How could I explain it? How could I even begin to understand it myself? Looking back now, I realize how much I ignored, how much I let slide because I didn't want to believe what was happening. And that's the hardest part of all. Not knowing when it all started, not seeing the warning signs until they became too big to ignore. I was trapped in my own denial, clinging to the belief that my son, my boy, couldn't possibly do something so awful. But the truth was there, creeping in like a shadow, and I couldn't deny it any longer. It took a long time for me to understand that those small, subtle shifts in behavior were warning signs, signals that something was wrong, that the son I had raised and loved for so long was no longer the person I thought he was. The man I thought he would become was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to believe it. And by the time I did, it was too late. I had spent years raising Junior with all the love a mother could give. I had sacrificed so much for him, my time, my energy, my own needs, so he could have a better life than I had. I worked long hours at the factory, often leaving home before the sun came up and returning after it had set. I gave him everything I had, thinking I was giving him the tools to become a good man, a man who would be respectful and kind just as I had tried to be. I never imagined that all those years of love, of care, would lead to this moment, the moment when everything I thought I knew about him would shatter. The first violation came so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that it left me breathless. It was one of those nights when the house was quiet, the only sound coming from the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I was lying in bed, my mind replaying the events of the day. Junior had gone out with his friends earlier, but now he was home and the house was still. It was a relief to have some peace after a long day of work. But then I heard the faint creak of my bedroom door. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just my son coming in to ask something like he often did. But this time there was something different in the way he entered. He didn't knock as he usually did. Instead, he just walked in, his footsteps quiet on the carpeted floor. I felt a strange tension in the air, something that immediately made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned to look at him, and his eyes were no longer the eyes of the sweet boy I had raised. There was something cold in his gaze now, something that I couldn't quite understand. He was standing by the edge of my bed, looking down at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice low and almost tender. "Can I stay with you tonight?" I had a bad dream. It wasn't the first time he had asked to sleep in my bed. When he was little, it had been common for him to crawl into bed with me after a nightmare, seeking comfort. But this was different. He was no longer a child. He was an adult, and I wasn't sure how to respond. My gut instinct told me that something wasn't right, but I dismissed the feeling. After all, he was my son. He had always been affectionate, always said he loved me. Why would anything be wrong with him seeking comfort from me now? I nodded, making room for him on the bed. But when he lay down beside me, the air felt charged, thick with an unspoken tension. I could feel his presence next to me in a way that was different from before. It wasn't just a simple act of comfort anymore. Something had shifted between us, and I didn't know how to navigate it. I tried to focus on the sound of his breathing, steady and slow, as we both lay there in silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, without warning, I felt him move closer to me. His body pressed against mine in a way that made my skin crawl. I froze, unsure of what to do. My mind screamed for me to move, to push him away, but my body didn't obey. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. "Junior, stop," I whispered, my voice shaking. I couldn't believe the words were coming out of my mouth. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just shifted closer, his hand moving to rest on my waist. The touch felt too intimate, too wrong. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to move away from him, but he held me still, his grip tightening slightly. "Mom, I'm just trying to help you relax," he said, his voice so calm, so insistent. "You've been working so hard. You need this." The words were like a slap in the face, but they also confused me. What was he talking about? What was he doing to me? I couldn't process it, couldn't understand it. He was my son. How could he be doing this to me? How could he be touching me in this way? "Junior, this isn't right," I managed to say, my voice trembling now. "Please stop." But instead of stopping, he moved his hand further down, grazing the side of my body. A cold panic spread through me. I could feel my heart racing, my breath shallow. I wanted to scream, to push him away, but I was frozen, my body unable to move. The paralysis in my left side, which had once been the result of a stroke, now felt like it was holding me prisoner in my own body. His hand lingered on me, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I couldn't believe it. How could this be real? How could my own son, the boy I had raised and loved, be doing this to me? When I tried to push him away, to stop him, he just laughed softly, a laugh that didn't sound like the Junior I knew. It was more of a chuckle, as if he thought I was overreacting. "Mom, relax," he said again, his voice soothing, almost playful. "I'm just trying to help you. You'll feel better." But I didn't feel better. I felt like I was drowning in fear, in confusion and disbelief. How could this be happening? My mind raced, my thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. But even as I lay there, unable to move, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This wasn't just a mother being overly sensitive. Something was terribly wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. When he finally stopped, I lay there in the dark, my mind reeling, my body stiff with fear. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to react. I felt sick, violated, and ashamed, not because of anything I had done, but because of what had just happened to me. How could I let this happen? How could I let my own son do this to me? That night, as I lay awake in bed, my body shaking with the cold sweat of fear, I realized that I had crossed a line I could never go back from. And I realized that Junior had crossed it too, only he had crossed it long before that night, and I had failed to see it. For so many years I had trusted him, loved him, given everything for him. And now, I had to face the reality that the person I had loved most in this world had become the person I feared most. That night I didn't sleep. The pain of betrayal, the confusion of what had just happened, kept me awake. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. The first violation was the hardest to admit to myself, but it wouldn't be the last. Something was changing in my life, and it was no longer in my control. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. And as much as I wanted to believe that my son was still the boy I raised, I knew that deep down he was someone else now. Someone I didn't know, someone I feared. The road ahead would be difficult, painful, and full of confusion, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't allow this to continue. I had to find the strength to stop it, To find a way out of the nightmare that my son had turned our lives into. The days that followed the first violation felt like a blur. A dark fog that clouded everything I saw, every decision I made, and every thought that entered my mind. I had always considered myself a strong woman, resilient, self-sufficient, someone who could weather life's storms. But this was a storm I had no way of escaping. The fear took hold of me in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was a quiet fear at first, subtle and insidious, creeping into my thoughts, my heart, my very soul. It was the kind of fear that never really goes away, the kind that hangs in the air, invisible but suffocating. In the beginning, it was the confusion that hurt the most. I couldn't understand how this was happening, how my son, the boy I had raised with love and care, could do something like this to me. How had everything gone so wrong? Was this my fault? Had I missed signs? The guilt was overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I doubted myself, my instincts, my ability to know what was real and what wasn't. And the more I questioned myself, the more isolated I became. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I didn't know who I could trust. How could I explain this to anyone? How could I even begin to speak the truth? The fear that crept in after that first violation was like a constant weight on my chest. Every time Junior walked into the room, my heart would race. Every time he touched me, my body would stiffen in panic, my muscles locking in place as if bracing for something painful. It wasn't just physical anymore, it was psychological. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that everything I did was being controlled by someone else. I couldn't even change my clothes without feeling his eyes on me, lingering on me in a way that made my skin crawl. At first I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just a phase, that maybe I was overreacting. But the longer I let it go on, the worse it became. Every small act of kindness or care he showed me was twisted into something dark and manipulative. His affection, once pure and innocent, had become something else entirely. He would bring me flowers, but I knew it wasn't just because he cared. He would offer to help me with things around the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something behind those gestures, something that wasn't right. What hurt even more was the way he made me feel like I was the one at fault. Whenever I tried to resist, whenever I questioned his actions, he would turn it back on me. He would say things like, "You know, you're lucky I'm here. Who else would take care of you? You should be grateful." And when I complained, when I told him that his touch didn't feel right, he would laugh it off as if I were just being paranoid, imagining things. "You're just tired, Mom," he would say. "You need to rest. You've been working so hard. You're just overthinking it." It was always the same response. Nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. I began to doubt my own feelings. Was I just imagining this? Was I really that exhausted from working all those years that my mind was playing tricks on me? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that nothing was wrong, the fear wouldn't go away. Followed me everywhere. It was in the way he would enter my room without knocking, in the way his eyes would linger a little too long when I was changing, in the way his presence made my heart race. It was in the silence, the quiet moments when I was alone with him, when everything inside me screamed that something wasn't right, but I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud. I became a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the very person I had raised with so much love. The psychological toll was far worse than the physical. It wasn't just that I couldn't defend myself anymore. It was that I was made to feel weak, vulnerable, and unworthy of respect. The more I let him control me, the more I lost myself. The woman I had been, strong, independent, confident, began to fade. I no longer knew who I was, only that I was someone dependent on him for everything. I started to shut myself off from the world. I avoided talking to people, avoided answering the phone, avoided even looking at the mirror. I couldn't face anyone with the truth of what was happening. The fear had isolated me, and the guilt had consumed me. I felt like I was suffocating, like I was drowning in my own thoughts and feelings, unable to reach out, unable to escape. Every night I would lie awake, my mind racing with questions, with fear, with memories of things I didn't want to remember. And the worst part was that I couldn't make sense of it. It was as if my entire life had been flipped upside down. I remember one particular evening when I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. Junior had gone out for a while, and I thought I could finally have some peace. But as soon as I was alone, the fear returned in full force. I could feel it creeping in around the edges of my mind, whispering to me that something was going to happen, something worse than what I had already endured. and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. It was in those moments, in the stillness of the night, that I realized how much of my life had been shaped by fear. Fear of disappointing him. Fear of losing him. Fear of what would happen if I spoke up, if I told anyone what was really going on. The fear had become my constant companion. It made me question everything I had ever believed in. It made me question myself. And yet, even as the fear consumed me, I knew that I had to find a way to stop it. I couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. But how could I break free from the hold he had on me? How could I find the courage to speak the truth when every part of me was telling me that doing so would destroy everything? I spent days, weeks, months in that prison of my own making, wondering how I could ever find a way out. I felt like a shell of the person I used to be, and I began to wonder if I would ever be able to escape this fear, this nightmare that had become my life. But slowly I started to see a glimmer of hope, a faint light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but the first step toward healing came when I started to acknowledge the truth. The truth about what had happened to me. The truth about the person I had raised. And the truth about the psychological toll that abuse had taken on me. This wasn't just about what had happened in the past. It was about understanding the damage that had been done, and knowing that I had the power to change my story, to take back control over my life. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most important. The fear wasn't gone overnight. But the more I understood it, the more I could see it for what it truly was. A tool of manipulation, a way for Junior to control me. And once I saw it for what it was, I knew I had the strength to fight back. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the fear still crept back in, when the memories of those moments made me want to run and hide. But every time I confronted that fear, every time I spoke the truth, I took back a little more of myself. And that, I realized, was the first step toward healing. I was still living in fear, but I was no longer living in silence. For months, I carried an invisible weight on my shoulders. It wasn't just the pain or the fear. No, it was something far more insidious: guilt. It wasn't the guilt a mother might feel when she thinks she's let her child down, or the guilt of not having done enough. No, this was different. It was the deep, suffocating shame that wrapped around my heart like a vice, whispering that I had somehow brought this upon myself. I tried to push it away, tried to tell myself that I was not to blame, but no matter how hard I fought, it always crept back in, finding a way to consume me when I least expected it. At first, I couldn't even recognize the shame for what it was. When the abuse began, I was in shock, unsure of what was happening to me. I tried to make sense of it all, but the truth was too horrifying to confront. So instead of dealing with it, I pushed it deep down inside me. I pretended it wasn't happening, hoping that if I ignored it long enough it would go away. But it never did. Instead, it grew inside me, festering, feeding on my confusion, my fear, and my silence. One night, when I was alone in my room, the weight of it became too much to bear. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my hands shaking. The guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. I had raised him. I had given him everything. Every ounce of love, every bit of care, every sacrifice. And now this. How had I not seen it? How had I let this happen? I felt a deep sense of failure, as though I had somehow failed him, failed myself, and failed every promise I had ever made to myself as a mother. The shame was suffocating. It wasn't just about what he was doing to me, it was the shame of not being able to stop it. It was the shame of feeling that somehow I was complicit in the abuse. I thought back to all those years of raising him, all the times I had praised him, telling myself that he was a good boy, a polite boy, a respectful boy. I couldn't help but wonder, had I missed the signs? Had I ignored the subtle shifts in his behavior, convincing myself that it was just his way of showing affection? I spent so many nights crying silently, my heart heavy with the thought that perhaps I was to blame. Maybe I had been too giving, too affectionate, too willing to put his needs above mine. Had I created this monster? I had always thought that love would protect him, that love would shape him into a good person. But love in this case had failed me. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. The guilt grew worse as I tried to justify his actions. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe I was misinterpreting things because of my own trauma. I found myself thinking these thoughts again and again, trying to convince myself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the truth was undeniable. What was happening wasn't normal. It wasn't love. It wasn't care. It was abuse. And yet there I was, trapped in my own mind, unable to admit it fully to myself. The shame of facing the truth was almost too much to bear. One day, as I sat in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I tried to hold a cup of tea, I had a fleeting thought. What if I just didn't tell anyone? What if I just kept living in denial, kept pretending like everything was fine? The thought was tempting. It felt like the only way I could protect myself from the shame, the guilt, and the reality of the situation. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The lies, the denial, they were killing me, slowly robbing me of the person I used to be. The turning point came when I had to make a decision. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. It took weeks of inner turmoil, of feeling lost, of doubting myself. But finally one day, after yet another instance of abuse, I realized that I couldn't live in denial any longer. I couldn't protect him anymore, because in protecting him I was destroying myself. I had to find a way to escape, to break free from the cycle of shame and guilt. I had to find the strength to stop pretending. And so, for the first time in a long time, I started to face the truth. I began to talk about it. I told myself that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't caused this. I had to remind myself over and over that I was not to blame for his actions, that what he did to me was not my responsibility. But even as I told myself this, the shame didn't disappear immediately. It still lingered in the back of my mind, questioning my worth, my decisions, my ability to protect myself. The guilt continued to haunt me, but over time, it became more manageable. I started to recognize that my self-worth wasn't tied to what he had done to me, nor to how I had allowed it to happen. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. In admitting the truth to myself, I began to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my strength. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the guilt and shame still weighed heavily on me. But I knew that in order to heal, I had to confront those feelings head-on. It took months, years, even for me to fully accept that I was not to blame for what had happened. It wasn't my fault that I had been manipulated, that I had been made to feel like a prisoner in my own home. It wasn't my fault that I had allowed myself to be silenced, to be made to feel like I wasn't worthy of respect. And yet, despite all the abuse, despite all the pain, I learned something invaluable. I learned that the shame and guilt weren't mine to carry anymore. I began to understand that it wasn't just about surviving the abuse, it was about living in the truth. It was about giving myself permission to heal, to let go of the guilt and shame that had held me captive for so long. And as I did, I found that the more I let go of those feelings, the more freedom I found. The more I spoke about it, the more I could share my story with others and help them see that they, too, were not to blame for the things that had happened to them. The road to recovery was long, and the weight of the past never fully left me. But I learned that healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It's a winding path, full of setbacks and challenges, but also full of growth and strength. And though the guilt and shame were a part of my story, they no longer defined who I was. Through it all, I came to understand one undeniable truth. It was never my fault. It wasn't my fault that he betrayed me, and it wasn't my fault that I stayed silent for so long. But now, I had the power to change the narrative, to rewrite my story. And that, in itself, was the most powerful thing of all. It's strange, the way life can blindside you when you least expect it. We spend so much time in the comfort of familiar routines, clinging to the illusion that everything is as it should be. We tell ourselves that the people we love, the ones we've nurtured with all our strength, are capable of great things, good things. But what happens when the foundation we've built everything on cracks, and the truth we've buried deep within ourselves comes to light? That day, when the illusion finally shattered, was not marked by any grand revelation. It was not a dramatic confrontation or an explosion of anger. No, the breaking point came quietly, in the most subtle of ways, and yet it was more earth-shattering than I could ever have anticipated. I had spent so many years convincing myself that my son was different, that he was still the same boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. Even as the signs grew more apparent, I refused to see them. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, that things would get better. The touching, the strange looks, the clingy behavior. It all felt so wrong, but I was a mother, and mothers have a way of holding on to hope longer than they should. I had convinced myself that Junior was just a boy who wanted to care for his aging mother. Maybe he was overcompensating for my illness, maybe he just didn't know how to cope with me being so dependent on him now. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, he didn't realize how inappropriate his actions were. And yet, deep down, there was a gnawing, unshakable feeling in my gut that told me I was fooling myself. The truth is, I knew. I had known for a while that something wasn't right, but the weight of what it all meant was too much to bear. For a long time I lived in a fog of denial, hoping against hope that I could change the situation, that I could will it all away. But eventually, the weight of reality became too much to ignore. The breaking point came on a quiet afternoon, just like any other. I had been sitting on the couch in the living room, my body aching from the strain of a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice. Junior had been unusually distant that morning, his mood sharp, a stark contrast to the sweet, affectionate boy I thought I knew. I had tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just tired, but deep down I felt the tension in the air, thick and palpable. He entered the room without knocking, as he often did. That had been one of the first strange things I noticed, how he would just barge into my room, whether I was dressed or not, with no regard for my privacy. I had always been a private person, but with Junior, I had learned to let my guard down. I thought that was what family did. They looked out for each other. They took care of each other's needs, and privacy no longer mattered when someone was there to help. But that day, as he walked in, his eyes locked onto me with an intensity that made me shiver. I tried to smile, trying to mask the growing unease that was beginning to consume me, but it didn't work. He stood there for a moment, not saying a word, just watching me. And then, without warning, he asked me in a voice I couldn't quite recognize, "Do you think you'll ever really need me again, Mom?" I froze. The question, simple as it seemed, felt loaded, full of an unspoken darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea how to respond. I had spent so many years thinking he would always need me, that I would always be there for him. But now it felt as though the ground beneath me was starting to crumble. My mind raced. What was he really asking? Was this his way of telling me he didn't need me anymore? Or was it something else entirely? Before I could gather my thoughts, Junior closed the distance between us, his hand brushing lightly over my shoulder in a way that, up until now, I had let slide. But this time the touch felt different, almost invasive. My heart began to pound, and a cold wave of panic rushed over me. "Junior," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it quivered despite my efforts. "Please, I need some space. I'm not feeling well today." But he didn't listen. Instead, he leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered, "You don't need space. You need me." His voice was strange, almost too soft, as if he was trying to convince me of something I didn't want to hear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away. I wanted to push him off me, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't move. The paralysis that had plagued me for so long had rendered me helpless once again. But this time it wasn't just my body I feared. It was my own flesh and blood. That was when the illusion shattered. That was the moment I realized that the son I had raised, the son I had loved unconditionally, had become someone unrecognizable. Someone who saw me as an object, someone who used my dependency against me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I sat there, unable to speak. For the first time in years, I didn't know what to do. The man who had been my son was now a stranger, and I had no idea how to escape him. How could I ever have thought that the affection he showed me, the care he offered, was genuine? How could I have allowed myself to be so blind? I tried to speak, to tell him that what he was doing wasn't right, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't know what to say anymore. All the years of love, of care, of sacrifice felt like they had been erased in that moment. How could someone who had been raised with so much love turn into a monster? How could the boy I raised to be a good man do something so terrible to the one person who had given him everything? As I sat there in stunned silence, Junior stepped back, his face now contorted with frustration. "You don't understand, Mom. I'm only doing what I have to. You need me. You can't survive without me. You'll see. You'll thank me one day." His words felt like poison. The familiar tone of manipulation was so clear, so practiced, that I knew right then and there that I couldn't continue living this lie. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I couldn't keep allowing myself to be gaslight, to be manipulated into thinking that his actions were for my own good. That was the moment the floodgates opened. The guilt, the confusion, the fear, all of it came crashing down on me. But instead of giving in, instead of continuing to be his victim, I realized that I had a choice. I could either live in denial, clinging to the illusion that things would somehow get better, or I could face the truth, no matter how painful it was. And so, for the first time in years, I made a decision. I would no longer live in fear. I would no longer be controlled by the man I once called my son. The illusion was broken, and with it, I found the strength to fight for my dignity, for my life, and for my freedom. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. The breaking point, as painful as it was also the beginning of my healing. It's easy to feel like you're alone in the world when everything around you starts to crumble. In those dark moments when you realize the truth about the abuse you've been enduring, the last thing you might want is to share it with someone else. Shame and guilt cling to you like a second skin, and the thought of telling anyone, especially people you care about, seems impossible. But in that moment of brokenness, when the weight of the truth is too much to bear alone, you realize that seeking help isn't just a step forward, it's a lifeline. For me, that lifeline came in the form of friends and professionals, people who showed me that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a courageous step toward reclaiming my life. It all started with Sarah, my cousin. I hadn't seen her in years, decades really. We had lost touch after my family fell apart. But when the darkness of my situation began to overwhelm me, it was Sarah who found me. She reached out unexpectedly, not because she knew what was happening in my home, but because she sensed something was wrong. She came to me one afternoon unannounced, with that familiar warmth and kindness that had always defined her. "Edith," she said softly, sitting beside me on the couch, "you've always been there for everyone else. Now it's your turn to let someone be there for you." It wasn't just her words, but the tenderness with which she said them. There was no judgment, no accusations, just a simple offer of support. I broke down in her arms that day, finally letting the tears flow. For years I had been carrying this burden on my own, trying to keep everything hidden, afraid of what the world would think if they knew the truth. But Sarah didn't judge me. She listened. And in her listening, she gave me permission to let go of the silence I had been carrying for so long. "Let me help you," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You don't have to go through this alone." I remember feeling a sense of relief wash over me as I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. Sarah didn't have all the answers, but she knew the first thing I needed to do was reach out to someone who could help in a more professional capacity. The very next day, Sarah took me to see Dr. Harrison, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. I remember walking into her office, my hands trembling, my heart racing. It felt like a huge step, but it was also the first real step I had taken toward healing. Dr. Harrison was warm and patient, and her office was a sanctuary of calm. There were soft lights, cozy chairs, and a calming scent in the air. It felt like the kind of space where, for the first time in years, I could feel safe enough to speak my truth. Dr. Harrison didn't push me to talk right away. She simply let me sit, let me breathe, and when I was ready, she gave me the space to share my story. The first words I spoke to her were shaky, hesitant. But the more I talked, the more I realized how much I had been holding inside. How much I had buried, thinking that if I ignored it long enough it would disappear. But it hadn't disappeared. It had festered. It had grown into something much bigger than me. "I'm scared," I told her one afternoon, after I had shared the most painful parts of my story. "Scared that it's all too much. Scared that I'll never be able to heal from this. And even more scared that no one will believe me." Dr. Harrison looked at me with compassion, but also with an unwavering strength in her eyes. "You're going to be okay, Edith. You've already taken the hardest step, admitting what happened. Now we work through it. You're not alone in this anymore." Hearing those words was like a balm to my wounded soul. For the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a path forward, a way out of the suffocating grip of fear and shame. Dr. Harrison taught me how to look at my trauma not as something that defined me, but as something that happened to me. She helped me separate the abuse from my identity. I wasn't the sum of the horrors Junior had put me through. I was more than that. I was a survivor, not a victim. But the help I received from Dr. Harrison wasn't just about understanding the psychological aspects of trauma. She also connected me with a network of other women who had experienced similar abuse. It was through these connections that I found something even more powerful: community. The other women in our group were at different stages of recovery, but they all shared one thing in common: the courage to speak out, to demand justice for themselves, and to reclaim their lives. In their stories I found pieces of myself, and in their strength I found my own. One woman, Marie, had been in a similar situation. She had suffered for years just like me, and when she finally reached out for help, it changed everything. Marie had been one of the first women in the group to speak about her experience. She had been abused by her own brother for years, and when she finally spoke out, her entire life turned upside down. But Marie had rebuilt her life. She had left everything behind and started over, much like I was beginning to do. I thought I was broken, Marie had said, looking around at the women in the group. But I'm not. And neither are you. We're here now. We're here to heal. And we're here to help each other. Those words stuck with me. They resonated deep in my heart. I wasn't broken, I wasn't lost, I was just finding my way back. And I didn't have to do it alone. The support of my friends, my family, and my therapist was invaluable. But what really helped me heal was knowing that I wasn't the only one who had suffered in silence. That there were others out there who understood exactly what I had been through. It wasn't just the professionals who helped me heal. It was the community of women who supported me. It was Sarah, who sat with me through the darkest hours and reminded me that I deserved better. It was the women in the support group who taught me that it was okay to speak my truth, even when it was terrifying. And it was Dr. Harrison, who helped me unpack the layers of trauma and begin the slow process of healing. Looking back, I realized that seeking help wasn't just about getting advice or guidance. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about saying no more to the abuse, to the manipulation, and to the guilt. Reaching out for help wasn't easy, and it didn't fix everything overnight. But it was the first step in a long journey toward healing. And it's a journey I'm still on. As I sit here now in my small shop, surrounded by the healing herbs I've cultivated over the years, I can't help but think about how far I've come. I've gone from being a woman trapped in silence and fear to someone who can stand tall and speak her truth. I've learned that seeking help, reaching out to others, and allowing myself to be vulnerable is not a weakness. It's the bravest thing I've ever done. And I've learned that just like the plants I care for, we can all heal if we're given the right care, time, and love. For anyone out there who's struggling, who feels alone, I want you to know that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to reach out, to speak your truth, and to start healing. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. There are people who care, people who will listen, and people who will help you find your way out of the darkness. You just have to reach out. If this story has touched you, if you find yourself resonating with what I've shared, I encourage you to reach out to someone today. You don't have to face your struggles alone. The road to justice is never easy, and for someone like me who had been raised to keep things quiet, to avoid making waves, the thought of fighting back in a legal battle seemed impossible. For years I had lived under the control of someone who was supposed to protect me, the son I had raised with so much love. But the time had come when silence could no longer protect me. The damage was done, and the truth had to be spoken. The day the police arrived at my door changed everything. I had spent years convincing myself that I could handle it alone, that maybe I was overreacting, or that somehow the abuse would stop on its own. But when I had finally gathered the strength to speak to someone about what was happening, the response was overwhelming. The system that I had once been so afraid to engage with, whether out of fear or guilt, was now my ally. That was the first step toward justice. It wasn't easy, though. The first call I made to a lawyer wasn't a moment of triumph, but one of trembling fear. I was scared that the whole world would judge me, that they would believe him instead of me, and that no one would understand the unimaginable pain I had endured. My lawyer, a kind and patient woman named Karen, made sure to reassure me from the very start. "Elellanar," she had said in that soft voice of hers, "you are not alone in this. We will do everything we can to help you. But you have to be ready. The journey ahead will be long. And it will be hard." I had nodded, though inside I wasn't so sure. The fear of what would happen to my son, the thought of destroying the family I had worked so hard to hold together, it was paralyzing. But Karen was right. We had to face the truth, and that meant going to the authorities, reporting the abuse, and starting the process of holding Junior accountable. When I told Karen about the abuse, her face hardened with concern, but there was no trace of judgment in her eyes. She had heard similar stories before. But there was something in mine that stood out. I wasn't just a mother speaking out against her son. I was a victim of years of manipulation, fear, and shame. A woman who had lost everything, including her sense of dignity, for far too long. But now I had a voice, and I was going to use it. It wasn't easy, and I was frightened. In the weeks that followed, Karen worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, calling witnesses, and filing reports. The emotional toll it took on me was immense. I had to relive the abuse, recount every horrific detail, all while worrying about how my son would react, how the rest of the world would view me. Every time I spoke out loud about what had happened, it felt like another piece of me was being stripped away. But with each step I grew stronger. The shame that had been placed upon me for so long slowly began to dissipate. The hardest part came when Junior was confronted. He denied everything, of course. He stood in front of the police officers and my lawyer, claiming that I was making it all up, that I was confused because of my stroke. He tried to manipulate the narrative, painting himself as the caring son who had given up everything to take care of me. The gall of it. He even went as far as to say that I was just trying to ruin his life. I could see the lies in his eyes, the manipulation in his words, and yet, for a moment, part of me questioned everything. Had I imagined it? Could he possibly be telling the truth? But the evidence spoke for itself. The medical examinations confirmed what I had feared. The scars, the trauma, the physical evidence of years of abuse. The doctor's report was clear. I had been violated, my body used in ways no mother's body should ever be used. The psychological toll was just as severe. The mental manipulation he had subjected me to, the way he had made me doubt myself, made me question whether I was truly crazy for thinking the things I did. It was all part of the plan. The trial was grueling. Each day I had to sit in that courtroom and hear Junior deny everything. He played the part of the wrong son to perfection, and I could see the sympathy in the eyes of some of the jurors, some of the witnesses. But I stayed strong. For the first time in my life, I spoke up for myself without hesitation. I recounted the details of what had happened. How the care he had promised to give me had turned into something unrecognizable. How his love had been twisted into something dark and monstrous. I did not flinch as I spoke. I told the truth, and in that truth I found my strength. Karen was there beside me, her unwavering support keeping me grounded throughout the process. She guided me through the legal maze, helped me navigate the intimidating questions and the cross-examination that came with the trial. It felt like a battle, but it was one I was determined to fight. There were moments when I wanted to give up, moments when the weight of the situation seemed too much to bear. But I reminded myself of the reason I was doing this. Not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been silenced, who had ever been made to feel worthless or afraid. This was for them too. When the jury finally delivered its verdict, I was a mixture of emotions. Junior was found guilty of sexual assault and abuse of a vulnerable person. The sentence wasn't as long as I had hoped, it never is, but it was enough to send him away for a while. I had been given some measure of justice, but the real victory was the power I had taken back over my own life. I had stopped hiding. I had stopped letting the shame control me. After the trial, I went through a series of emotional and legal steps to reclaim what was mine. My assets, my home, my dignity. Everything I had worked so hard for was finally mine again. I rebuilt my life brick by brick, each piece a reminder of the resilience I had discovered in myself. I moved into a small apartment that I could call my own, far away from the place where I had once been a prisoner. It wasn't easy, but it was liberating. Though I had achieved some form of justice, the real journey had only just begun. The road to healing was long and winding, but with every day, I learned how to forgive myself. I had survived. I had fought for my freedom, and no one, not even my own son, could take that away from me. Today, I stand as a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of seeking justice, no matter how difficult it may seem. It's not always about winning in the eyes of the law. It's about reclaiming your life, taking control of your future, and healing the wounds that have been inflicted on your soul. This chapter of my life is over, but I have so much more ahead of me, and I will continue to fight, not just for me, but for everyone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that justice is possible, and that healing can begin. When the dust finally settled after the trial, I was left standing at the threshold of a new life. A life I wasn't sure I was strong enough to live. But the truth was I was free. Free from the chains of fear. free from the daily torment that had once been my reality. It was a strange feeling, one that filled me with both relief and uncertainty. I had spent so many years focusing on others, putting their needs first, and now for the first time in my life, I was being forced to face my own needs and desires. The first step toward reclaiming my independence was simple. It was letting go. I had spent so many years tied to a life that wasn't truly mine. My time, my resources, my emotions had all been spent on a family that, until now, had taken everything I had to offer without ever considering the toll it was taking on me. And now, in this new chapter, I had to learn what it meant to live for myself. The first act of independence was moving out of the house that had once been my home with Junior. For so long, I had been tied to that house, to the memories of a life that was both beautiful and broken. But it was time to leave. The house had become a prison for me, a constant reminder of everything I had endured. I couldn't stay there, not when I had so much to look forward to, not when I had learned how to live without fear. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of Savannah, in a neighborhood that was quiet and peaceful, far away from the chaos of my old life. It was small, just one bedroom, a cozy kitchen, and a small living room. But it was mine. There was something incredibly liberating about signing that lease, about knowing that I was making a decision for myself, not for anyone else. I wasn't just living in a space. I was creating a space where I could heal, where I could rediscover who I was. First, it felt lonely. I had been surrounded by people, by noise, by demands for so long that the silence in my new apartment was almost suffocating. But I soon realized that the silence wasn't something to fear. It was something I needed. It gave me time to think, to reflect, and to finally hear my own voice after so many years of being drowned out by the needs of others. The next step in reclaiming my independence was financial freedom. For years, I had been giving away my money, pouring it into the lives of people who didn't appreciate it, people who had taken advantage of my generosity. But now I had a choice. I had saved a bit of money over the years, and with the settlement from the lawsuit, I was able to pay off my debts and secure a small savings account. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me peace of mind. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about whether I could pay my bills, whether I could afford food, or whether I would have to ask for help. I started looking for work, something I hadn't done in years. At first, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had always worked hard in the textile factory sewing clothes for other people, but that felt like a lifetime ago. I knew I couldn't go back to that kind of work. It was too physically demanding for someone like me now. But as I spent more time thinking about it, I remembered the herbal remedies my mother used to make, the teas she would brew to soothe a cold, the balms she rubbed on sore muscles. I remembered how much I loved those moments, how peaceful and fulfilling they were. It felt like a lifetime ago, but suddenly it didn't seem so far away. I enrolled in a local course on medicinal herbs and natural remedies. The course wasn't long, but it was enough to reignite a spark inside of me. I learned about plants, about their healing properties, and how they could be used to treat a variety of ailments. I discovered that what I had once learned as a child, sitting at my mother's knee, was more than just an old-fashioned hobby. It was a growing field, one that people were increasingly turning to for answers to their health concerns. By the time I finished the course, I knew what I wanted to do. I started a small business selling herbal teas, oils, and natural remedies at the local farmers market. It wasn't much at first, but I poured my heart into it. Every jar of tea, every tincture, every bottle of essential oil felt like a piece of me being shared with the world. The more I worked, the more I realized that I had found my purpose again. For the first time in years, I was doing something for me, something that brought me joy, something that reminded me of who I was before everything changed. The business grew slowly at first, but it was steady. I learned how to talk to people about what I did, how to explain the benefits of natural remedies, and how to make my products stand out. I began meeting people who were also interested in holistic health, and many of them became loyal customers. As my business grew, I gained confidence. I started giving talks at local community centers, sharing what I had learned, encouraging others to take charge of their health. And every time I spoke in front of a group, I realized that I was no longer the scared, dependent woman I once was. I was a woman with a purpose, with something valuable to offer the world. I also began to reconnect with people. True friends, the kind who had been there for me, even when I didn't realize I needed them. One of those friends was Sarah, my cousin who had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go. Sarah had been a constant source of strength for me, and I began spending more time with her. She had always been someone who believed in my strength, even when I didn't. Sarah became my partner in this new chapter of life. We would talk for hours, share ideas, and dream about the future. She encouraged me to expand my business, to take risks, to live fully again. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to build a life that I could be proud of. I found joy in the small things: a morning cup of tea, the satisfaction of a good day's work, the sound of laughter shared with friends. I learned to take care of myself again, to do things that made me happy without feeling guilty. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with who I was. The road to independence wasn't easy. It took time, patience, and a lot of hard work. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was doing the right thing, when the weight of everything I had been through seemed too much to bear. But every day I woke up, I reminded myself that I had survived. And that survival was the first step toward reclaiming everything that had been taken from me. Today, I stand as a woman who knows what it means to live for herself, who understands that independence is more than just financial freedom. It's the ability to make choices that are in alignment with who you are and what you value. For me, independence means not just running my own business, but running my life in a way that feels true to me. So, when people ask me what the secret to my success is, I tell them that it's not about money or fame or accolades. It's about rediscovering your own strength, your own voice, and your own worth. And once you do that, everything else falls into place. I may be 72, but I'm just getting started. The best part of my life is yet to come. And I can't wait to see where it takes me. This was the turning point in my life, reclaiming my independence. And it has been the most empowering journey I've ever embarked on. The road was long and sometimes painful, but it taught me that it's never too late to start over, to take back control, and to live life on your own terms. It was hard to even begin thinking about healing. For years, I had lived with the weight of betrayal, fear, and isolation. Years of emotional scars that I couldn't even begin to touch without trembling. But now I knew I had to face them. I had to heal. The first step was admitting I needed help, something that for the longest time I thought I could do without. But I was wrong. No one gets through trauma alone. I remember the first day I walked into Dr. Harrison's office like it was yesterday. I was filled with so many mixed emotions: fear, hesitation, and an almost paralyzing shame. How was I supposed to sit in front of a stranger and talk about things that were too painful to even think about, let alone speak out loud? But Dr. Harrison was kind, warm, and patient in a way that I had never experienced before. She was the first person in a long time who truly listened to me without judgment. And that made all the difference. Therapy wasn't easy. It was like opening up a floodgate that I had kept shut for so many years, fearing that if I let too much out, I might never be able to stop. Every session felt like an emotional workout, each conversation forcing me to confront parts of myself I had long buried. But with each tear that fell, with every word that I spoke, I felt a little more of the weight lifting off my shoulders. It was painful, yes, but it was also healing. Dr. Harrison helped me understand something crucial that I had never truly processed before. I was not to blame for what had happened. For years I had convinced myself that I had somehow failed, that I should have seen the signs sooner, that maybe I had done something wrong. I had accepted Junior's twisted version of events, where he was the caring son, and I was the one who misunderstood. But in therapy, I learned that abuse in any form is never the victim's fault. The blame lay squarely with the abuser, no matter how convincing their excuses or how ingrained the manipulation. This revelation was both freeing and painful. It made me realize just how much of my life I had spent carrying someone else's guilt. But therapy wasn't just about unpacking the past. It was also about learning how to move forward. Dr. Harrison introduced me to techniques that would help me regain control of my life. One of the most valuable things I learned was the power of forgiveness, not for Junior but for myself. I had spent so much of my life forgiving him, excusing his behavior, and sacrificing my own peace to maintain some semblance of family harmony. But I had never forgiven myself. I had never given myself permission to heal fully, to stop blaming myself for something that wasn't my fault. Forgiveness, I learned, was not about letting the other person off the hook. It wasn't about excusing the pain or the abuse. It was about freeing myself from the chains of anger, resentment, and guilt that had kept me shackled for so long. It was about reclaiming my peace and finding a way to move forward, not for Junior's sake but for my own. But forgiveness was never a linear process. Some days I felt like I had made great strides. I would wake up feeling strong, knowing that I had taken control of my life again. Other days the past would come rushing back, and the wounds would feel just as fresh as they had been the first time. There were days when I wanted to forgive, and days when the anger would consume me, and I would find myself wondering how I could ever forgive someone who had done such terrible things to me. Still, I kept going. I kept showing up for myself even when it felt impossible. Dr. Harrison encouraged me to be patient with myself, to allow space for those difficult days, and to remember that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. A journey that took time, effort, and most of all, self-compassion. As I worked through my therapy sessions, I began to realize just how much strength I had in me. Every time I spoke the truth, every time I acknowledged the pain, I was building resilience. I was not the same person I had been before the abuse, before the stroke, before the years of silence. I was someone stronger, someone who had faced the darkest parts of my life and was still standing. I was rebuilding myself piece by piece, and with each step, I was reclaiming a little more of who I was before Junior's actions consumed me. Therapy also opened my eyes to the importance of boundaries. For so long I had let people walk all over me, especially those closest to me. I had believed that love meant giving everything, even at the expense of my own well-being. But I learned that true love, whether it's for myself or for others, means knowing where to draw the line. It means protecting my peace, my body, my heart. It means saying no when something isn't right, even if the other person doesn't understand, even if they try to make me feel guilty for it. One of the most powerful tools I learned was how to reclaim my voice. For so many years I had been silent. I had been too afraid to speak out, too afraid to confront the truth, too afraid to lose the little bit of family I had left. But through therapy I learned that my voice was my power. My truth mattered. My story mattered. And I didn't have to carry the shame any longer. Speaking my truth wasn't easy, but it was the only way I would ever heal. After months of therapy I felt a shift inside me. I began to see the world differently. I saw that there was more to life than just surviving, than just getting through each day. There was joy, there was love, and there was a future to look forward to. I wasn't just someone defined by her past. I was someone who could create a future for herself, one that was full of hope, purpose, and healing. Of course, forgiveness didn't mean I had to reconcile with Junior. It didn't mean that I had to invite him back into my life or that I had to forgive the unforgivable. Forgiveness, I came to understand, was not about returning to the past. It was about freeing myself from its hold. I could forgive and still protect myself. I could forgive and still live a life that was filled with dignity and respect. Through therapy, I found strength in places I never expected. I found strength in my vulnerability, in my willingness to confront the pain, and in my decision to choose my own healing over everything else. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I came to understand that healing wasn't just about mending the broken parts of me. It was about becoming the woman I had always been deep inside, the woman I had nearly forgotten. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, my autonomy, and my worth. And most importantly, I learned that healing wasn't something that could be rushed. It wasn't a quick fix. It took time, patience, and a lot of love, especially self-love. The journey of healing is ongoing. But each day I move a little further away from the pain and closer to the life I know I deserve. In the end, therapy was not just about healing from the trauma of the past, it was about creating a new future. One where I was whole, where I was free, and where I could finally live life on my own terms. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life that was mine. One that was worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long time I could finally say with confidence, I am healing. I had come a long way. The woman who once lived in the shadows of fear, shame, and silence now stood in the light of her own strength. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but each step of my journey had been necessary for me to rediscover something I thought I had lost, myself. As I sat in my small living room, looking out the window at the street below, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come from the woman who was once trapped by her own circumstances, living in a cycle of pain that seemed never ending. Today there was no pain, only the peace I had fought so hard for. There was no more manipulation, no more fear, just me learning to live freely for the first time in decades. It's hard to explain the feeling of true freedom. It's not just the absence of physical chains, or the relief of no longer being in a toxic environment. It's more than that. Freedom is the ability to wake up in the morning and know that the choices you make are your own. It's the peace that comes with reclaiming your sense of self, your voice, your power. It's knowing that no one can take that away from you again. In the years that had passed since I first walked away from my son and the abuse, I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. I had learned to love myself in ways I never thought possible. I had learned that I could be my own protector, that I could take charge of my future without relying on others to define it for me. I had created a life that was mine to live, and it was beautiful. But even with all the progress, there were still moments when the past would try to creep in, like an unwelcome guest at the door. Some days, when I least expected it, memories of the abuse would flood back. His touch, his voice, the way he made me feel so small and insignificant. The guilt would start to bubble up, and I would wonder if I had made the right decision. But that's the thing about freedom. It doesn't erase the past, but it does give you the strength to face it and keep moving forward. I had been afraid of facing the truth for so long, afraid of what might happen if I let go of the guilt and shame that had been weighing me down for so many years. But once I took that first step, once I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the truth, I felt lighter, freer. It was like stepping out from behind a dark cloud into the bright sunshine. And I knew deep in my heart that I had done the right thing by setting boundaries, by standing up for myself, and by saying no when it mattered most. The first time I really felt the weight of freedom was when I decided to finally sell the house I had shared with Junior. It had been so much more than just a physical place. It had been a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in my life. Every room held memories of abuse, of fear, of broken trust. But when I sold it, I was closing that chapter once and for all. I remember the day I handed over the keys to the new owner. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and for the first time I felt truly free. I took the money from the sale and used it to start something for myself, something that would give me purpose and joy. I had always been interested in plants and herbs and natural remedies. It was something I had always turned to for comfort during the darkest days. So I decided to open a small herb shop, a place where I could share my love of healing plants with others. It wasn't easy at first. Starting a new business at 72 isn't exactly the typical dream of most people my age, but it felt right. It felt like a way to take control of my life, to create something beautiful out of the ashes of my past. The shop was small at first, just a little corner of the market. But soon word spread and people started coming to me for advice, for remedies, for comfort. It felt good to be needed, to be appreciated for the knowledge and care I could offer. I learned that there is power in helping others, in giving back, and in doing something that brings joy not only to others but to yourself as well. It was a simple life, but it was mine and it was full of purpose. And the best part? I had finally stopped living for others. For so long I had been trapped in the role of caretaker, always giving, always sacrificing, always putting others before myself. But now I had learned to put myself first, to listen to my own needs and desires. I had learned that it was okay to be selfish sometimes. It wasn't about abandoning others, but about making sure I was whole so that I could be there for them in the right way. I had learned that freedom doesn't just mean the absence of abuse or control. It means the presence of choice. It means being able to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, and what you do with your life. It means finding the courage to live for yourself, not for anyone else. And in that process, I found a new strength I never knew I had. I found a resilience that came from within, from the deep well of love I had for myself, a love that I had neglected for so many years. Now I wake up each morning with a sense of gratitude. I'm no longer bound by the chains of my past, no longer held hostage by the fear of what could have been. I've learned to embrace each new day as a gift, to find joy in the little things, watching the birds outside my window, feeling the warm sun on my face, talking to customers who come into my shop, or just sitting quietly with a cup of tea and reflecting on how far I've come. I've learned that freedom isn't just a state of being. It's a way of thinking, a way of living. Looking back, I see that the pain and the trauma I endured didn't break me, it shaped me. It made me who I am today. A woman who knows her worth, who understands the power of her voice, and who is no longer afraid to stand up for herself. I've learned that no matter how old you are, no matter how many scars you carry, it's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to start over, to heal, and to live a life of true freedom. And so I stand here today at 72 in my little herb shop, with a sense of peace and fulfillment that I never thought possible. I've made it full circle, from a life of abuse and silence to a life of healing and independence. I've learned to live for myself, to take joy in my own company, and to never let anyone take my power away again. This is my new beginning. This is my true freedom.